I'm Jeff Rock. Thank you so much for sticking with us in the end. We're at the final thing here. Lunch or dinner is actually coming right around the corner. I hope you're going to be joining us at Tris. It's an amazing thing. Debbie really goes all out on this kind of thing. She actually hand selects the wait staff that come to this. So yeah, this is the way to do it. So we're going to be introducing the 10-minute review process in this case. But on the front end of things, we're going to have to start talking about the fact that a tool isn't going to solve everything. So we want to talk about some of the issues that are in the performance management process that we want to kind of tackle with this tool, and that there's a lot more involved in it than just let's integrate this new tool and everything's going to be fine. So with that, we are going to talk about HR's favorite topic, performance management. Boo, I get it, I understand. But with this tool and with this process, we're going to integrate something that makes a lot more sense. So I'm sure through some of the presentations, you've actually heard people talking about the Astros and things along that line. And I'd be remiss if I didn't actually start talking about every year Hilton does fantasy football. It is an absolute just knockdown, drag-out fight every time. And once again, I'd be remiss to say to let you know that I am 6-0 right now. Absolutely. So this is coming from a good source right now. Listen up. So I thought it would be interesting to approach this from a different perspective and kind of take a look at the U.S. workforce as if it were a football team. So if we have a fantasy football team, we put this together. For those that aren't very familiar with football, it consists of 11 players trying to move the ball in a particular direction to be able to score points on the end. So a very simple, basic idea. So statistically, if we took the U.S. workforce, or you can look at this as if we took your office and took your credit union and kind of statistically brought it down to 11 players, what are we looking at? 4 out of 11 players would know which end zone they're actually supposed to be going towards. What's worse than that? 2 of them care. 2 players would know which position they're actually supposed to be playing. And 2 players would believe that what they do on the field actually matters and changes the outcome. Putting all that together, 8 out of the 11 players on your team would just as likely be rooting for the other team. So what does this mean? What is going on here? Performance management actually touches on every aspect that we look at here. When you talked about performance management, we want to let them know a clear goal. Where is the organization going and how do you fit into that? When you start talking about it as well, you let them know why they matter, why they should care. The organization has a strategic direction and a point that we want to make, and here's why you matter in that. When you're talking about review process, if they don't know what their job is and how they succeed in that job, how can they exceed your expectations? How can they continue moving in the right direction? And players believe that how does my job, my role on what I do on a day-to-day factor matter in the big picture of that strategic direction of the organization. So this is the actual statistics that come along there, and it's based off of purpose. So what is happening? Performance management as it stands now is just ineffective. What we've done in the past, what has got us here, is not going to be able to get us where we actually need to be. So with that winning team on the field, let's take a look at the score. So I want to ask you a couple questions here. These are quick and easy. What do you think? Percentage of managers that are dissatisfied with the organization's performance management. What percent do you think? 70? Okay. 95%. Keep in mind, statistically, there's a plus or minus 5%. So this means everybody does not like performance management. Those that know me are probably tired of hearing this as well. The only thing worse than performance management right now is not having performance management. So we really need to reevaluate how we're doing this. All right, HR. Percent of HR leaders that believe the system does not deliver accurate information. What do you think? 90? 80? 90% again. So you're getting a picture of how this is. Even though we're doing performance management and spending the time and spending the money to do this, we don't even believe that the information we're getting is something that is useful to be acted upon. So percent of executives that say that their system doesn't deliver. What do you think? What's that? Same range. little bit less actually, 58%. So more than half of the executives. And this is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy if you think about it. If your executives don't believe that this is something that's actually valuable and actually useful, they're not going to invest the time, the resources to go and kind of figure out what the problem is. And last but not least, percent of companies that believe that their performance management program delivers exceptional value. How many do you think? I see a lot of heads going, oh, 20%? 2%. So we are not doing a great job on this aspect. So what's happening here? What's going on? Some of the root causes that come along with this, that performance management is failing and we're not able to really accurately move this in the right direction. Goal setting, unclear expectations, and a lack of defined or wrong goals. If we're not actually, our managers who are instituting this process don't know the goals, or they're just making it up as they go, they're disseminating that misinformation, and when they talk to their team, if they don't give them a clear vision, a clear direction, they're missing that opportunity. I focus on this one because goal setting is so important. It is the number one thing that we have to focus on when it comes to performance management and review processes. Feedback, of course, not enough. I don't remember what I had for breakfast 3 days ago. How am I supposed to remember what my manager told me to focus on 7 or 8 months ago? And when I had that review, they told me all the things I did wrong last year and make sure not to make those mistakes this year. So having a more frequent interval will give us an opportunity to really accent what we should be doing and how we should be moving. Coaching, this kind of comes down to that managers, they've been successful. They've moved up in the organization, and most of them are not very good at actually coaching. There's a lack of focus in the development. We don't understand actually how to get you from here to where you want to be in your career. So we have a hard time really illustrating that. And this is a big one for me, lack of transparency. Open up and understand how and what career progression looks like and how you can get an individual to where they need to be in their organization. Last but not least, the rating system. It's inconsistent. One year I was a 5, the next year I was a 3. I felt like I did the exact same thing. What happened? I don't get enough information about it. So we'll talk about clearly defining a rating system and making sure that it fits into the process. And not enough time is put into reviews. This is, once again, we'll kind of go into some of the common complaints. We deal with long forms, different aspects of things that kind of make people not want to put effort into this process. So to that point, some of the common complaints, you've heard these before. You understand that they're long forms in some cases. It takes so much time. There's not a link to compensation. We don't really, why am I doing this every year? And when you think about it, I can't remember the statistic right off the top of my head, but it was about $2,500 per person to actually run our performance management processes. That's what you're actually investing in time, productivity loss, things along that line, to take your managers out of that situation and give them a solid review. So people say, this is an absolute waste of time, why are we doing it? And the system is just kind of baked into that. So the last time I'm going to ask you for these things, these are going to be the top 3 things that are the reasons why performance management is ineffective. What do you think? Percentage of leaders that are skilled at providing feedback and coaching? 10? A little bit higher than I actually would have expected. 35%. We got some, in comparison to the other numbers, we got a great number here. This is something that we have to solve for. We understand that a lot of coaching is required, and that's a time investment that a lot of times we don't have, and there's a lot of focus on other ways. So we want to build a tool that kind of caters around this, and we can create something that gives them the opportunity that, yeah, we understand you're not great at coaching, so let's get you a tool that you can utilize that will move things forward. Percentage of executives, and once again, I talked about that this is a top-down methodology. If the executives aren't on board, you're never going to be able to really follow through with this one. So what do you think? Percent of executives that talk enough about performance management as a core business process? 20%? I like that, 22%. And last but not least, percent of executives that model. Now, once again, culture comes down from the top of the house. So what they see the leaders doing, that's going to be more important than the mission, vision, values on the wall. Because if they read that mission, vision, and values, or they go through a performance review, but then they see the top of the house doing something completely different, it's going to be a bit of a discongruency of what's going on there. So what do you think? Percent of executives that model effective performance management behaviors on a day-to-day basis? 15? 50, okay. 11%. So we are definitely dealing with a shortcoming of multiple different aspects. So we have to look at this as this is where the landscape is today. What do we do about it? We can't change these numbers immediately and quickly because they require a long investment. So let's talk about the tool that goes on that. And we're not going to talk about the tool just yet. The tool is coming because we have to understand that a tool is not going to fix all of this. So we have to look at it from a cultural perspective. So what do employees want most? And we have to look at this because when we do performance reviews, we have to remember this. We have to be able to make sure it's linked to compensation. And the number 2 thing that people want is recognition. If you build a system that somebody does something fantastic that you can stop and say, that thing you just did, yes. Let's talk about that. Let's see how you can continue doing that. How do we implement that? Getting that instantaneous recognition is a huge bump. And doing it in a way that's not just knuckles, good job. That's awesome. If you would like to talk to me afterwards, I have a 4-step praise process. I call it the power of praise, so to speak. And it talks about how you can actually give somebody much more than just a coffee shot jolt of adrenaline, something that lasts and something that's impactful. So keep in mind that recognition is very, very important. 3 of these things performance management touches on very directly. The 4th one, conditions, you can actually touch on that as well because you're starting to have more frequent conversation with people. You may not be able to change conditions, but you can start hearing more about them. Is it freezing where you're working? Those kind of things, you'll start having that. So not a direct connection, but you'll have that. But as far as security, if you have a good review and a good understanding, an ongoing process, you feel much more secure in where you stand and how you can grow and continue to move within your career. So let's talk about recognition because compensation is obviously one thing, but recognition is where performance reviews can really come into play. Here's how, in general, people prefer to be recognized. Now, keep in mind, a majority prefers to be recognized in person. However, you can't take away from the fact that other people want other ways of recognition coming to them, either via email. This is up to the management team to really know their team and understand what would be best to deliver recognition. Why this is so important is that, well, it would seem, okay, 61% get it in person, but when it boils down to it, only 1 in 10 people are actually receiving recognition in the way that they prefer. So if you have a system where somebody did something absolutely amazing and they get an email and they go, oh, it would have been so much better if somebody came up to me and said, you are doing a phenomenal job. Let's talk about that. So keep this in mind. We have to focus on that people want to be recognized, but they also want to be recognized in a way that matters to them. The big transition here is that recognition is not something we just do on a day-to-day basis. We need to realize that recognition is how we are helping guide the behavior for future transitions. Employees, we want them to do the right thing. So what are we doing recognizing them to change their behavior to move it along to there? And I always say that this is a 3-layer process because we have the results, we have the behaviors that are generating those results, but we also have the beliefs that are driving those behaviors. So if you're just touching in on the results, you're missing a whole aspect of how to actually change somebody's behavior and change the process that they work through. So performance management, and I hate just reading off the screen for this, but I think it bears repeating. Performance management can and should provide a process that helps professionals grow. The key here is that professionals grow. Your tellers are professionals. When they have the capability of growing their career, they're not just exempt, they're not non-exempt employees, they are professionals. So everyone should be respected and understand that they need recognition, and you'll be able to grow those individuals through this process. So what are the important things and how we started designing this process? Ongoing and continuous feedback. We need to be in touch with our team much more often, much more consistently, and being able to recognize them when good things happen or when they have behavior that is not conducive to the business. So that's kind of the step 3 process. Reinforcement for excellent work. We need to be able to touch and recognize them when they do excellent work. Reinforce that behavior, continue the process. Corrective action plan for subpar performance. So these are the keys to a actually successful performance management process. There's not too much to it, but actually accomplishing these and working on them is obviously a very difficult task as we looked at. So this first step of how to decide what to solve when you start talking about a performance management plan, you have to take these all into consideration. All of these feed off of each other, But however, focusing on one of them will give you that opportunity to make the largest gains. We talked about perceived value and actual value. This is where you start realizing that you can make the biggest gains by working on one of these. Now, as you increase efficiencies, you'll also increase network, so on and so forth. So all these are interchangeable, but you want to be able to point your focus at one particular one. So when we start talking about performance management, these are kind of the conversations that we'll have. What are you trying to solve for? What's your biggest critical issue? And let's start talking about that and putting a plan in place that's going to attack that. So as bad as performance management is, it's not all terrible. It's not all. Some things are actually working, and that's where we want to focus. These are the important bits. Once again, focus on the goals being the top thing. People need to know how to be successful in their role. If it comes down to just job descriptions or understanding exactly where they need to be, or as they're illustrated, you're doing great. If you continue doing that, here's where we see you going. Let's talk about a process to get you there. Also, once again, transparency, make it an ongoing process. It comes down to that communication structure again. Always have to be in there. So when I talk about focusing on goals, we really want to put this in a perspective of how does my role impact the organization? Why does what I do on a day-to-day basis matter? The younger generations, I've said this a couple times, are increasingly demanding to understand why business decisions are made. And especially when I'm in a role toiling every day, how does the bigger picture work? Am I making the mission move forward? Am I actually making changes? So make sure that when you have these review sessions and you have these opportunities to sit down and talk on an ongoing basis, that you're fitting in what they're doing and how that aligns with the strategic direction of the organization. They want to be a part of something. John always gives the great talk about, you talk to the millennials and say, hey, we're family here. But then they realize, the families didn't quite work out well for them. So that's where the football teams and the Astros and all that kind of stuff come into play, because they feel a sense of community. When they understand how their role fits into the bigger picture, they get that sense of community as well. So, questions to open the dialogue. We understand, once again, that the managers, they've been successful because they've been great individual contributors. So, opening a dialogue. Now, these don't have to be quoted just for the straight fact of that, but the point should be there. Open-ended questions. What went well for you this time? What can we do differently? Let's have that conversation. What would make your performance better next time? What can I do to help you succeed? Once again, I don't recommend leaving these just as this quote and have a list that people go through. Make these your own. Have that conversation, have that connection, create that relationship. And if you have managers that are really, really, really struggling to give that coaching, you can break it down into one step further. When they have these ongoing conversations with the team, give them the opportunity, just the age-old, start, stop, continue. Here's what I would love to see you start doing. But I noticed that you did X, and let me tell you how that impacted the team. So keep doing that. We really want to see more of that. Having these conversations on an ongoing basis gets them in alignment with what the manager expects to see, gives them potential for the growth, and it makes the conversations easier because, like I said, we know that some managers are just not good at giving these conversations. We don't like giving negative feedback, and we feel like anytime we go into a review, we've got to talk about, well, you did a lot of things wrong. So, okay, well, I'm going to do this sandwich. So you did this great, you did this terrible, and then you did this great. How does that make you feel? Not too great. So having these conversations of, and also this works both ways. Have your employees go to your manager and say, what should I start, stop, and continue? And the manager should ask, what should I start, stop, and continue? Have that a two-way street. Both of them together, everybody involved in this process should continue on. And the biggest argument that we get, of course, when performance management comes into play or review process come into play is that there's so much time involved invested in this. Touching base with your team is not an additional responsibility. It is the responsibility. It is part of being a manager. It is part of being a supervisor. Your job is not only just to manage that they come in on time and do their job. Your job is to manage that those individuals. The credit union has invested a massive amount of money and time to grow those people, to grow your team. And I really determine how I judge a true successful leader are the people that they've grown around them. You know, if you're leading on and absolutely crushing it, but you're leaving a wake of dead bodies behind you, my type of leader, I really like to see who is actually developing and growing those people. So with the performance review process being an ongoing and a constant touch-in, you get that opportunity to really develop and grow and find out what your team really needs to be successful in the future. So all of this comes down to, once again, as I said, a tool is not going to fix all of these pieces. It is truly a cultural mindset that has to make a transition within the organization. And cultural transitions take time. It takes consistency, and it takes a process that you have to put into place and go over and over again. So step one of understanding how to create that cultural mindset of an ongoing process, consistent and constant feedback, and giving everybody an opportunity to succeed and understand what it takes to succeed, we really have to define what is high performance in your organization. What does being a high performer mean? And if you want to even classify it as you are a high performer, that's a static type of environment, what you did to be a high performer this period. Open up the conversation inside that. So what we've done is we've kind of looked at the rating system from a little bit different perspective. This is not going to fit for every organization, but this is an example that we'd like to leverage and utilize on this one. Unacceptable, obviously, we understand we're unacceptable lands. The change here is that 2 is the old 3. This is an individual that comes in 4 out of 5 days and does a very good job. They're the teller that comes in, they're happy, they're engaged, but on Friday it's payday. You know, they're a little bit slower, they're not quite on top of the ball. They're a solid performer, but they're 4 out of 5 days. So what happens when your client comes in on Friday? Well, you should come back in on Monday. We're so much better on Monday. Believe me, come on in at that point. So there's truly in a development stage there. This is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people look at that like, oh gosh, I'm a 2, this is absolutely terrible. But this is a solid performer. A contributor is somebody that on 5 of 5 days is doing very well. They're consistent, they're constant, they know exactly what they need to do. They still have some growth potential, but when I come in on Monday or I come in on Friday, they're the same level of consistency. That is very hard to accomplish. So these contributors are where your core focus is going to be. Everybody kind of going towards that contributor. A valued performer is the same as a contributor. However, they'll go to the manager and say, hey, is there anything else I could be doing? You know, I see you guys are a little bit swamped over here. Is there something I could help with? It's a big difference. I mean, it's actually a little change, but it's a big difference in what that person is demonstrating. They're looking at not just their role, they're looking at them involved in the department and how they can make a change and make an impact. These are very hard to achieve. These are what we would consider in the past. These are your 5s. These are your stars. These are amazing individuals. So what's a 5? Where's the star performer? Your top performer doesn't even have to ask. They come in, they see that, okay, you know, you've had an issue with overtime. I saw somebody over here was struggling, so I went over there and helped them. They didn't have to go to the manager and say, is there anything else I could be doing? They already accomplished it. They not only looked at themselves from a departmental level, they looked at it from a credit union-wide level. How does my being here change the entire dynamic of my entire department and the organization? This could be less than 10%, 2% of the organization. Top performers are hard to come by. And that's kind of, if you heard a conversation that I had previously about talking about segmenting the work populace, this is where those critical individuals will be. They may not be a critical role, but these kind of critical individuals are the ones you really want to recognize and understand that they are adding a disproportionate value to your credit union. So we look at this as, okay, we have a rating system that's not too much different here, but clearly defining what it means to be in each one of these levels and having that resonate down through the entire organization, being supported from the top of the house, develops more consistency in the rating process, and it makes an individual understand that if I want to be a valued performer, I know what that means. I know what that takes. I need to start going to my manager and understanding, hey, how can I help? What more can I do in this situation? We understand that we're completely backed up against the wall in some cases, but they know what they need to accomplish to be able to get there. That helps them understand the achievement level and the career direction that they can go. So once again, while we started talking about this process, we also want to reevaluate how we give feedback. And in this case, we've redubbed this and termed this as feed forward. So this is the oracle process. Let's start talking about the future. We can't change the past. We know in the past, okay, there's some different things, but let's start talking about here's where you are. Let's talk about where we can get you. I think one of the biggest impacts here is that, and I've felt this myself in performance reviews in previous positions, that I would go into my yearly review and they say, well, you remember that time that you did X, Y, and Z? I say, no, I didn't. They say, well, yes, you did. Well, I don't see it that way. They would take more time trying to prove that I was wrong than help me get to where I was right, because it was immediately an emotional moment, like, wait, hold on, what are you saying here? Because I realized that impacts my pay, impacts my performance, so I wasn't listening to what I could go forward, and they weren't giving it to me either. So having this feed-forward methodology, either every 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, some organizations are doing this every week, having their managers come in and start talking about, so what went well last week? I mean, it doesn't take long to have that conversation. And if you're not actually touching base with your team, you're missing a huge productive opportunity to really develop that team further. Okay, so we've gone all through this process. We've reevaluated how we need to start looking at performance management. We'll finally get to the title of this presentation. What is the 10-minute review process? Once again, like I said, we have to take all of this in consideration when we start looking at how to integrate a tool, given all of these things that we have to take into consideration and be very cognizant about. So, easy as 1, 2, 3, plus a little more, not too much. So, future-focused statements. I would always go to this employee when I need extraordinary results. Rate this on a disagree to agree, a 5-point scale. Very quick, very easy. You can think of an employee right now. How would you place them? Done. Next statement, I choose to work with this employee as much as I possibly can. Same thing. If I could, I would promote this employee today. What we're trying to do here is step away from the process of what you think about that employee to what your manager would do with that employee. And that changes the mindset. It changes the perspective of how you're actually reviewing somebody. You're not reviewing their personality, you're reviewing their performance. And when it comes down to what I would do with this employee, it takes a lot of those biases out. Obviously, it's not going to fight all of them, but it fights most of the biases that come into play when you go there. Especially if you're doing this about every 90 days, you have a running record of your progression. This is not something I recommend doing every year because, once again, we talked about an ongoing process, but it doesn't need to be done every conversation. So about 30, 60, 90 days. In this case, we've seen very good success with about 90 days having that sit down. We've disconnected the compensation conversation at this point. This is a development opportunity. When you have these check-ins and then you do this review process, we're not talking about compensation just yet. We don't want to talk about it every 90 days because this is a development conversation, and when compensation comes into play, a lot of other triggers start happening and a lot of different things start flying. So we remove that from that process. This is development. So the next step to this, plans for future growth. So we understand what you would have done with the employee. Let's talk about what you plan to do. Now, question 1 and question 2 are kind of an or, which direction you want to go with this one. How could the employee improve performance? What could they have done last time in the last 90 days that I think that they can easily change and move forward from this point on? Or what performance issue should they work on? We try to phrase these differently, and we want to make sure it's a positive impact rather than, okay, here's what you did wrong. Let's talk about how to fix it. Also, what is the employee's best strength? This could be also an opportunity to say, I really see this individual going to a particular location. They see a lot of interest in mortgage. Let's see if we can do some career development there. It's an opportunity for HR to really receive some viable, good information that isn't really based on just biases or just the recency effect or something to that matter, what they would do with that employee, as well as maybe where that employee could be going from one of the people that supposedly and should know them best. And last but not least, and actually a lot of this information like I said, we kind of targeted about 6 minutes to be able to complete this entire review process. So a lot of this information can come out of those start, stop, continue conversations that you've had through that ongoing process. For the most part, the manager already knows this, but they know it not over the last year, they know it in the last 90 days or last 30 days. Much more recent information, much more consistent information as well. Last but not least, overall performance rating. Some companies tried to get away from performance ratings and doing an overall, and unfortunately had to backtrack on that very quickly. We still do need some form of rating system, and that's why we put so much emphasis on defining what is high performance in your organization. So when you have clearly defined that, integrated it with the culture of the organization, that transition starts to happening, that we understand what it means to be a contributor. So 1 year you're not a 5, and the next year you're a 3, and you don't know what the heck you did. That consistency comes into play, and you're able to do a 1, 2, 3, 4 as an overall rating. So in total, we wanted to be able to look at what they've done over the last 30, 60, 90 days, understand what I would do with that employee if I had all authority in the world to be able to do so. And I talked very briefly about what they need to do in the future. Taking all that in mind, and I see that they're really providing and coming in every day and giving that 5 of 5 effort, I'm going to give them an overall rating of 3. So a lot of people viscerally go, oh, well, God, I'm a 3. When we clearly define what a 3 means, that's completely different. And they have to understand that, and that's a conversation that you have to have. So like I said, just implementing a tool and suddenly changing, hey, a 3 is great. No, you need to build that up, have that conversation so they know what a 3 means. And if you're a 5, what that really means, how much you're thankful for that, and giving them the recognition that they deserve on top of that. So all of that together, those 3 little sections take you about 6 minutes to actually put together. Give you about 10 minutes in grand total. You're actually be able to create and develop a review that actually gives viable, good information in about a 10-minute process that HR can actually utilize to start developing a career development plan, understand what your perspective is of that individual without actually knowing the individual. You know what you're going to do with them. Or is this person ready for promotion? Are they moving up? Or are they not going together? If you say this person is not, I don't go to this person at all. I don't see them moving anywhere. Okay, that's a clear sign. Let's start talking about a development process. You're able to have great information from a very quick process and something that snaps together and fits into the organization and the culture and what managers should be doing already. That said, any questions?
So on that future focus statements,
Bring it on.
so on these things, is the manager going over these just for HR's purpose, or is it going over them for the employee? I'm sorry.
Can be both. I don't recommend actually giving the rating while you're doing that process and talking to them, but you can also kind of tip your hand if that's something. These are mostly for HR, but we have seen some where they've actually integrated into the review process itself and sitting down with the employee saying, okay, let's have a conversation. I go to you all the time. You're my go-to. The bad part about that is that I always go to this employee. Well, I don't really do that. It's better to have that side conversation to say, okay, well, here's where you are. Let's talk about where we go from there.
So you would rate each one of these things on a scale?
1 to 5. And like I said, this is just a good an example of that. You can design this when we actually do a consulting process. This is just kind of one of them that we've utilized. We'll design it specifically towards cater to what you want to accomplish there. It could be yes or no questions. They could be I agree, disagree, or it could be that 5 scale.
Have you ever seen a scale of 3 instead of 5?
I haven't done one. I think that a 3 scale is a good idea because it starts limiting a lot of the biases that come in there. But I also feel like you start kind of focusing, you'll get the, I'm trying to remember the bias off the top of my head, the law of small numbers, and you kind of go right down the middle. This gives them that variation to say, well, I kind of agree. If you do a 3 scale, it kind of forces their hand to, I'm neutral, I strongly agree, or I disagree, something to that effect. Really how you design that scale, though.
Is there an element for self-evaluation?
You can add one. Not in this particular review. However, yes, you can actually add a self-evaluation. We find that self-evaluation information is valuable to an extent, but a lot of times people don't see their own blind spots. So to be able to kind of tease that out and make sure that people are truly looking at themselves with a mirror and truly seeing what's there is a hard thing to accomplish. It's usually better to have a trusted advisor or a mentor give these type of things. You only get one. Mm-hmm.
And then we're trying to get compensation. So let's say compensation only happens for a year, but they've been given 4 scores. Are they getting the compensation for the last score? I think it's that one, or is it a accumulation of the ones that year? What's the connection?
Kind of the go-to on that one. It can be both. I don't recommend just tying it off the last one. The whole point of this is to gather and garner a lot of information that shows a clear trend. If a person who has been constantly a 3, you can believe that they are constantly that. Now, if everybody in that department is always a 3, that raises a flag. Something else is going on there. So I recommend actually looking at as a trend as it goes. So if you have ones that are one time they're a 2, next time they're a 3, and next time they're a 2, it's kind of a thing to have a conversation about. What's actually happening? What do you think? What happened in this time? And a lot of times you'll have that information with those open-ended questions at the end. Now, if you do see ones that are a 2, and then they're a 3, and then they're a 3, you can clearly, and a 3 again on top of that, you can clearly see that they've actually made improvement. And that's where those compensation conversations come into play. Here's where you started. Here's where you are. Let's talk about that from there. So I would say, yes, actually tie them all together. I don't recommend just the last one. Mm-hmm.
From a broad spectrum of what's out there. And one thing we're getting is that we're moving away from them in the trend. And so how does that work connecting to compensation? It's not a number. So,
Yep.
And some of the companies out there that have performance management, that's really not the trend. They're nervous about numbers. They feel that they're back in high school and the end of the day. What do you see out there?
The trends are that people that are trying to develop and design these, and the statistics are showing that those that have shifted to no rating system or moving away from those rating systems have lost touch with tying it to compensation. They've lost touch with those items. Now, there could be a lot of things that kind of tie in together, but for the most part, what we've seen, and especially what we've experienced, is that anytime we've decided on going, okay, we're getting away from the rating system, think about it like schools. You have rather than A, B, and C, suddenly you have a monkey and banana, and today you were a grape. How do we tie that together? I don't recommend ever saying, hey, you are a 3. Once again, tie that to what that means. The number is just there to give that good representation of how that is. So what that meant is you're a 3. No, you're not a 3. You are a consistent contributor. On 5 of 5 days, you have performed admirably, and we can't do it without you. Understand that this is not a bad thing. You're not that number. You are this person that has done this for us through this process. And so that's why I said on the front end, you clearly define what those actually mean. It's just more of an administrative thing at the end to be able to put that number on the page. For the most part, we've seen a lot of people that have transitioned to not having those numbers to switch back to actually having those rating systems. I'm sorry? Oh, perfect. God, I didn't even recognize you. How are you?
I'm in the manager of the tool, and that's their assessment.
Mm-hmm.
We don't share that with you.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to say, hey, this is my go-to person, whatever it may be. As we got a little more structured, we didn't have as much as this job and skill set. We're smaller. So we're looking more into what I need the master to be at this level, where we need to go. So we put in some management by executive code that the employee gets for the manager sits down with them. They talk through this process. It wasn't what HR does with that. But it's made it, you didn't make it, you need to still do this, this is the area to further develop,
Mm-hmm.
and then we set the next conversation. So we're at the point now, because we did define a little more, whether it may be you're loading on a organization IRA, or whatever it may be, that the employees coming forward now, because they have a bit of a task, and saying, this is an area I feel that I could work on a little more, but we're directing them to tools. So it's still self-motivated. These are some online trainings available. You can do it with so-and-so, and you follow them the next time we open an account. So that's what they get, but they don't know that they're random, or whatever it may be. But it helps the manager get a picture in their mind, but it's not handed over. So that's how we could do it. And we don't, okay, so that came up to, we do it, we did not get it off. You're going to get the 3%, here you go. We had those conversations. Compensation was a separate. Based on hopefully a series.
Mm-hmm.
So what is not, and there's been a few like, oh, well, you didn't get this, well, that's totally new, like you said, or caught off guard.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of have to go back to, this is, so your first few go-rounds, you're just testing it out. This is supposed to be future-oriented. Now, say you're evaluating a branch manager, that should have been conversations all along. So if I see that, I pull it from the out, and just do something else in the performance area, it's not into a deep conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And we incorporated it in what happened in the annual review and all that. But actually, as we've seen some growth and with some compensation, we are now looking at potentially having a mid-year for certain staff that have been rated for the sort of city that they have hit up closer to the mid or a little beyond. So it's a learning process, and they're going to come back at some
I'll be there November 15th. I'm on the way.
November the 15th. But it's good, I think, because, well, how to come up with a schedule. I know how to make a board report. I think that doesn't. We had to start taking it seriously when we're not in the groove. And it didn't need to be HR reminded.
Mm-hmm.
You had it, you're given your schedule, put it in your Outlook. As a manager, it's your responsibility to ensure that they're covered.
And these processes, they do need executive amplitude behind them to understand that this is important to the executive. Like I talked about, how many executives actually talk about performance management as a business process, something that is integral to growing the business. So the more executive amplitude that you have behind it, people realize that this is not just the flavor of the day. And when you actually introduce a new performance management process, most people are relieved. They realize, they understand what the process they're going through now, and we talked about it, they don't like it. People hate that system. So when you say, okay, we've really thought about this, we've gone back to the chalkboard, as it were, and redesigned this, let's talk about this process. I recommend, if you're considering this, to have a conversation on the front end. Here's what we're considering, here's what we're thinking about. Don't have the solution and then say, guess what we're doing? If you think about when change management happens, what do you feel like when change happens to you? You can think of a couple adjectives very quickly, versus how do you feel when change happens through you? If your team, fantastic. And as the culture shifts and transitions into something that people start looking forward to these conversations. A lot of this is kind of founded in a lot of Ernst & Young's study that they've actually followed through this with us. They started off with a process that's somewhat very similar to this. And at first, they had to have the managers, and they did an every week check-in. All the managers checked in with all of their employees every week. The managers started kind of falling behind in that one. The employees started scheduling meetings with the manager because they wanted that, and they understood it was connected to their compensation, connected to their career development and their growth, and it actually matters because the CEO, the executive team said this is important, and we're continuing to push this. So the culture continues to shift. It takes time, but it is a growth process. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And it is a good opportunity. You can have these as formal meetings. You can have them informal meetings, just as long as they're constantly and consistently touching base, touching point. And then they have an informal meeting. They can come back and do the review in 6 to 10 minutes. Fill out the information, get you that good information. HR can actually do something about it and leverage that. The whole goal is to be able to get you good information to be able to develop and grow and make sure that your managers are actually investing in their team. That's, like I said, it's not over and above their job. It is part of their job. All right, any other questions? Thank you so much for sharing that. It's always great to hear what we're actually doing something, what the impact is and what's actually changing. Culture change takes time. All right, any other questions? I'm just going to wait. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it.